Welcome into the Venus retrograde version of the Fun Astrology and MMA Cycles.com Merriman Market Analyst podcasts combined here on Saturday when we conjoin to read the free weekly newsletter published every week at the top of the MMA Cycles.com website by Ray Merriman, a financial astrologer extraordinaire who has been doing this since back into the 1970s. Standing very tall in a space that he created over the decades. So let's jump in. First of all, a headline from the Financial Times. This was from Friday. Headline: inflation in Japan rose 3.3% in June, outpacing the U.S. figure for the first time in 8 years, and underscoring how Asia's most advanced economy is no longer an outlier in global inflation. This increases the pressure on the Bank of Japan, which meets next week and faces calls from investors to unwind its ultra-loose monetary policy. Japan remains the world's only central bank with negative interest rates, and any reversal of this strategy would have massive implications for global financial markets. End quote. So Ray asks, where would you like to start with the power-packed lineup of Level 1 Geocosmic signatures that culminate this weekend? One source we would highly recommend for an in-depth analysis and timing of several financial markets likely to be affected would be the 4-hour recording of our July 16th annual mid-year 2023 webinar on financial markets, which is now available. In fact, there's a link right there in that paragraph I just read where it will click right through it from the newsletter. And that, of course, at MMAcycles.com. We could also start with the Venus retrograde this Saturday, July 22nd. We identified this powerful geocosmic signature several years ago as an indicator of major policy changes by central banks of the world, which in turn have a direct effect on interest rate-related markets, such as currencies and treasuries. As noted in the quote we read from the Financial Times, Japan's latest inflation report shows prices rising faster than expected. Finally. But now, what should the Bank of Japan do? Will they start to hike after so many years of negative rates? Under Venus retrograde, that's possible. An interesting little factoid is that Venus goes retrograde approximately every 19 months, or 5 times over 8 years. Every 5th time, or the 8th year, it happens in the same sector of the signs. So when you connect those 5 points, it forms an almost perfect pentagram in the charts. This time it occurs in Leo, which last happened in the summer of 2015, 8 years ago. And during that last passage, China repegged its currency vis-a-vis the U.S. dollar, which stunned global financial markets. And now Japan and its central bank may be on the verge of causing similar disruptions in the global currencies markets, not to mention the escalating discussion on the possible launch of a new gold-backed BRICS currency to compete with the U.S. dollar for world trade transactions. So far, the currency markets have reacted very tamely to the announcement. But then again, Venus is just beginning its 42-day retrograde cycle. Like Mercury retrograde, we can expect to see whipsaws and fake-outs, especially since Venus will make 3 passes of a waxing square aspect with Uranus, the planet of disruptions, surprises, and sudden reversals. That's between July and September. Venus retrograde is not the only supercharged aspect occurring now. Mars, anger, in Virgo, the workforce, has a correspondence with labor strikes. Mars is forming an opposition to Saturn of grievances and complaints in Pisces, the film and entertainment world. And right now, Hollywood has gone on strike. I don't think the world has a sense of how serious this might be. The world has never taken Hollywood seriously, and this may be the lot of Pisces in general. But there is some serious money to be lost here, as well as serious cultural activities that could be lost for an extended amount of time, that could make the next several months, or even years, a little more depressing than otherwise might be the case. It's a possible turn that Saturn in Pisces could follow. With Venus retrograde, also in Leo, we may be spending a lot of time watching reruns of movies we loved once upon a time. Venus retrograde in Leo likes nostalgia, going back in time when life was fun and enjoyable. But Mars in Virgo, opposite Saturn in Pisces, on the other hand, is shaping up to be a buzzkill for movie lovers as well as movie stars, movie producers, and anyone connected to the U.S. film industry. And then there is Barbie. Interesting that possibly the last big blockbuster movie of 2023 has to do with a walk down memory lane for millions of mothers and children, just as Venus goes retrograde in the children's sign of Leo. Now the short-term geocosmics, a quote from Thursday's Wall Street Journal. The Federal Reserve hopes that a new, faster payment system will let U.S. bank customers send and receive money almost instantly, but it could be years before the speedier network gains widespread traction. The Fed said Thursday that it launched its long-awaited FedNow system, which is intended to allow bill payments, paychecks, and other common consumer or business transfers to be available quickly and around the clock. That's a change from the existing slower system that is closed on weekends and can at times take several days before consumers can access their funds. And then a quote from 1978, the Alan Parsons Project, the song What Goes Up. What goes up must come down. What goes round must come round. What's been lost must be found. Venus retrograde 2023 also finds the Fed implementing its new FedNow system. And one has to wonder if all the bugs have been worked out as it launches under Venus retrograde, plus the Mars-Saturn and Sun-Pluto oppositions, as well as the Jupiter semi-square to Neptune. None of these signatures offers any sense of readiness, and each has its own history of challenges when it comes to operating something smoothly. With Mars-Saturn, there is a feeling of frustration that something is trying to launch before it is actually ready. With the Sun-Pluto, there is often the threat of danger, where there should be safety precautions in place. And with Jupiter-Neptune comes a tendency to be overly optimistic, and also careless where details are involved. We may wish for something to work as intended, although many see a dark side to this and they wish it not to work, which is a natural response with Pluto's involvement. But reality may have other ideas than for a wish to come true. As far as world stock indices go, the Jupiter-Neptune semi-square on July 21st is a dynamic that often correlates to irrational exuberance or hysteria. Right now, it is the former for world equity markets, many of which enjoyed a very gainful week. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P 500, and NASDAQ all soared to new yearly highs late last week, right into this powerful geocosmic time band where sentiment and expectations can turn on a dime, as we say in America. Gold and silver also enjoyed strong rallies. Gold's rally reached a new cycle high of 1989 on July 20th, well up from its low of 1900 on MMA's last three-star CRD, critical reversal date, of June 29th. Silver soared to $25.47, also on Thursday, July 20th, up from its recent low of $22.14 on June 23rd. Crude oil is testing its highest level since late April, closing near $77 a barrel. Bitcoin was down most of the week off its yearly high of $31,827 on July 13th. It's ending the week slightly below 30,000. But the bigger story was, or will be, in the currency markets. The euro made a new yearly high of 1.1275 last week, but the Japanese yen started falling sharply at the end of last week, even as inflation ramped up beyond expectations, suggesting that the Bank of Japan may have to consider raising rates to support its currency and to fight inflation. But so far, nobody's buying it. It's going to be an interesting 6 weeks as Venus turns retrograde now, especially as it squares Uranus a second time August 9th, right near the midpoint of its retrograde cycle. Venus is the planet of expectations, but it's also known to be indecisive when expectations are not realized. Retrogrades are known for reversing decisions. What do you do when expectations are not met? You are indecisive, and you think you should reverse previous decisions, but you feel paralyzed to act because you don't want to make another mistake. So you freeze. You use disclaimers and qualifiers for everything you say, confusing people as to what you really mean. This is the challenge for the Fed coming up, and probably for other central banks as well. One thing everyone might want to remember these next few weeks is to not get too fixated on a particular expectation of how things will work out, because chances are those expectations will not manifest as expected, in work, love, or the markets. So enjoy the moment, the now, as it offers much entertainment and the possibility of fun and enjoyment. But be careful of getting too attached to the next. With Jupiter semi-square Neptune, Mars opposite Saturn, and the Sun opposite Pluto, bubbles can burst and heads can spin. That concludes this week's newsletter. Well, I'll tell you what, this week has been chock full of you can't make this stuff up, folks. So Ray mentioned the labor disputes from Mars, anger in Virgo, workforce, opposite Saturn, which you could say death. And I saw in this morning's headlines, that's on Saturday the 22nd, that Yellow Freight System, a company that's been in business since 1924, is facing the possibility of a strike by the Teamsters because Yellow Freight has not been paying out its pension funds. There's a video going viral now about this driver who was being told he might not get his pension after 30 years of driving for them. I didn't watch the video because I don't like that string of language, but you get the point. Several years ago, this is probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I recorded an interview for a radio station, and I used my studio to record an interview with Robert Kiyosaki. Of course, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. This was back before COVID, and in the off time when we weren't rolling, he and the host were basically talking about, like, people think they're going to get a pension? Robert Kiyosaki has been public about this for a long time. This was not some hidden conversation. He's been out there saying it for quite a while. Don't rely on entities, governments, pensions, etc. You got to go build your own retirement plan. That's been his position for quite some time. Well, here's Venus retrograde, and these signatures of, as Ray so well pointed out, Mars opposite Saturn, Sun opposite Pluto. Here you go. And by the way, they're saying that if they do strike, that package delivery around the country could greatly be affected. So I go online and just search up around pension funds. Listen, these are all 2023 headlines. From The Guardian, U.S. pension funds are on the brink of implosion, and Wall Street is ignoring it. Here's one from December 28th, 2022, obviously right at the end of the year. State pension plans were hammered in 2022. Next year will be worse, from Politico. Here's one from Pennsylvania, just a local newspaper a month ago. Report, nearly 22% of Pennsylvania's municipal pension plans are in distress. Is that fake news or is that really something serious? I heard Robert Kiyosaki saying it was very serious. And this is where I really appreciate the steady hand of somebody that's been doing it as long as Ray Merriman has. And remember, back in the last hyperinflation period, the late 70s into the early 80s, is when Ray was really getting up and out of the ground with his newsletter service, his financial advisory, and it was all based on astrology. So been there, done that, got the T-shirt and the wisdom. T-shirt's probably gone, but the wisdom is still there. And thanks to the MMA team for letting us share this space with you on Saturdays. All right, level up tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Eastern on the Fun Astrology YouTube channel and in our private Facebook group, which you can join, Subconscious Mind Mastery and Fun Astrology Podcast listeners on Facebook. We're going to lift up some peaceful, calm Venus retrograde energy to the sky and pray for this planet. 8 o'clock tomorrow night Eastern. See you guys. Have a great weekend. Back on Monday.